So we talked a little bit about what area is in our last video. And we said that area is really the number of 1 by 1 squares, these are ones, not absolute values, squares that fit inside a figure. Now those squares could be the entire square, or maybe we're cutting those squares into smaller pieces, so you get area of like 2.5 squares. Okay, that's why our area comes into units that are square inches, or square centimeters, or square feet, or square miles even, depending on if you're thinking of acreage of land. So how do we find area? Well, it depends on the type of figure. Let's start with the simple one, parallelograms. Now, parallelograms have a base and a height. So our area of a parallelogram is really nothing more than base times height. Now, we've seen some special parallelograms. In elementary school, you learned that area of a rectangle is length times width, which is actually the exact same thing as base times height. We're just giving two different words. So another way to look at it is length times width. But these two things, they say the exact same idea. And in a square, well, since a square has all four sides the same, an easier way to look at a square, if I do side times side, is just side squared. But when it comes down to basics, all three of these are the same formula. They're just a different version of the same thing. What you have to be careful of, and this is major through all of the stuff that we've done, this base and height, those things must always make a right angle. Okay, so base and height have to make a right angle. Length and width have to make a right angle. Side and side have to make a right angle. Our dimensions when we do area or even when we do volume have to make right angles. Okay, so that's very important. So we've got our basic parallelogram formulas. We can move into triangles. Now, the nice thing about a triangle is really just half of a rectangle. We can see it really clearly when we look at a right triangle. Okay, there's my base and height. So this is really breaking it up into halves. So when it comes down to it, the area is nothing more than half the base times the height, because it's the same thing as my parallelogram, just half of it. So here's area equals half base times height. Be careful. Make sure your base and height make a right angle. If I spun this thing around, you could still use this as the height and this as the base. The base does not have to be the bottom. So many students want to draw in a new height and make the problem more complicated. Look for that right angle. That's what you're going to look for your base and your height. So this one's still half base times height. Okay? Getting into more complicated figures, a trapezoid. Trapezoid, you could do a couple things. You could break this up so that you have two triangles and a rectangle on the inside. And sometimes that's necessary. We call that dissecting a figure, breaking it up into easier figures like triangles and rectangles. Sometimes you want to do that. Sometimes, though, I could just say, hey, I've got this entire base and I've got this base. Notice they're different. So the area of a trapezoid is actually half the height times the sum of the bases. So think of it as the height times the average base, okay, if you want to think of it like that. So the height times some average base that's in here, okay? So there's my area of a trapezoid. A lot of people forget this one, but if you remember it, it makes life really, really easy. A couple of areas that we want to talk about, even though we mentioned them in our last unit. I just want to reiterate the area of a circle, okay? Area of a circle is pi r squared. And that's our entire circle. That's going to give you everything. But if we only want a part of the circle, if I only want this part of my circle, then I'm going to set up my proportion. We called this a sector. So the sector is equal to the area, or the sector over the area of the circle is the central angle over 360. Okay, so just remember, this S means, and we covered this in the last unit, area of sector. And this is the central angle. okay? And what we ended up with down here was the area of a circle. So if you just remember that proportion from our last unit, this is very, very simple. All right, so now what I want you to do is try to do some problems, okay? Go into the Google form and answer each of these. I think there's 7 problems there. Try those, check your answers. If you make mistakes, figure out what your mistakes are. That's how we learn.